The house needed repairs. I sold the car. We all make sacrifices, right? Ronald said with a dismissive shrug, not even looking up from his newspaper. I stood frozen in the driveway, staring at the empty space where my silver SUV should have been parked. The vehicle I'd spent 3 years paying off. The one containing my emergency roadside kit, the family photos I'd been digitizing, and the laptop bag with all my work files. You sold my car? Without asking me? My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Ronald finally glanced up, his expression a mixture of annoyance and superiority. Your mother and I discussed it. The roof is leaking, and your car was just sitting there while you were gone. It's not like you were using it. I searched the kitchen for my mother, finding her hunched over the sink, scrubbing a pot with unnecessary vigor. Mom? Did you know about this? She didn't turn around. Ronald handles our finances, sweetie. You know that. My name is Millie Jameson, 32 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I was a financial analyst returning home to Portland after a successful business trip. I'd spent the week in Chicago closing a major client account, looking forward to sleeping in my own bed and maybe taking a drive along the coast this weekend in my now non-existent car. Where are my things that were in the car? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Garage, I think. Ronald waved vaguely toward the back of the house. Some guy named Jerry bought it. Gave us a fair price, all things considered. That car had a lot of miles on it. Jerry who? I pressed. Did you get his contact information? Ronald sighed dramatically. What does it matter? The deal's done. Be a team player for once, Millie. Your mother and I have been letting you stay here rent-free for months. I bit back the reminder that I'd moved in temporarily to help them when Ronald lost his contracting job, that I'd been paying for groceries, utilities, and half their mortgage payment despite having my own apartment that now sat empty, that the rent-free arrangement had been their suggestion when they were facing foreclosure. Instead, I walked silently to the garage, where I found my belongings haphazardly dumped into a plastic storage bin. My laptop was missing. So was the external hard drive containing my backup files. Those electronic things fetched a decent price, too, Ronald called from the doorway, as if reading my thoughts. Jerry threw in an extra $300 for them. Should cover the plumber's bill. As I stared at him, something cold and clear crystallized in my chest. This wasn't just about the car. This was about power, Ronald's need to assert it, and his fundamental belief that anything I owned was ultimately his to dispose of. What he didn't know was how very, very wrong he was. My mother married Ronald Weber 4 years ago, after a whirlwind 6-month courtship that began when he renovated her kitchen. He seemed charming back then, confident, capable, full of big plans and bigger promises. I was 28, living in Seattle and building my career at an investment firm. I flew home for their small wedding, genuinely hoping Ronald would make my mother happy after a decade of loneliness following my father's death. The first signs of trouble appeared just months after the honeymoon. Ronald's contracting business began struggling, with clients complaining about unfinished work and permit violations. He blamed the economy, unreasonable customers, jealous competitors, never himself. Then came the drinking, the gambling debts, the calls from collection agencies that my mother tried to hide from me during our weekly video chats. A year ago, I transferred to my firm's Portland office and moved into my mother's house temporarily when the bank threatened foreclosure. I intended to stay for a month while helping them restructure their finances. 1 month became 3, then 6, as I discovered the true extent of their financial troubles. It's just until Ronald gets back on his feet, my mother would say, her eyes both hopeful and apologetic. I created budgets that Ronald ignored. I paid bills he forgot about. I set up automatic transfers from my account to theirs to cover essential expenses. When I suggested Ronald look for steady employment, rather than chasing elusive contracting jobs, he bristled. I'm not punching a clock for some corporation at my age, he'd declared. I've got prospects lined up. Big ones. The prospects never materialized, but his resentment of my financial contributions grew. He began making snide comments about handouts and temporary assistance, as if I were a government program rather than family. He questioned my spending habits while making unnecessary purchases himself. He borrowed my credit card for gas, then acted offended when I asked him to repay me. Still, I stayed, partly for my mother's sake and partly because I was making progress. Their mortgage was current again. The credit card balances were slowly decreasing. I'd even helped my mother open a separate savings account, encouraging her to rebuild her emergency fund in case Ronald's big prospects never came through. What Ronald didn't know, what I had deliberately kept from him, was that 6 months ago, my mother had added me as a joint account holder on their main checking account. It was supposed to be a practical move, allowing me to handle bills more efficiently while Ronald focused on rebuilding his business. "Let's not mention this to Ronald just yet," my mother had whispered as we left the bank. "He's sensitive about money matters. He might see it as interference." I had agreed, not wanting to create tension in their marriage. Now, staring at the empty space where my car had been, I wondered if that had been a mistake. The next morning, I woke early and checked my bank's mobile app. The deposit from Ronald's sale of my car hadn't appeared yet. I got dressed for work, my movements mechanical as I tried to process the violation I'd experienced and determine my next steps. In the kitchen, my mother was already making coffee, her shoulders tense. "I'm sorry about your car, honey," she said softly. "Ronald should have discussed it with you first." Yes, he should have. I accepted the mug she offered. "Mom, this can't continue. I need my own transportation. I have a job, responsibilities." I know. We'll figure something out. Ronald says once the roof is fixed, he can focus on that bathroom renovation job for the Millers. That should bring in enough for a down payment on a used car for you. The Millers. I'd heard about this supposedly lucrative job for months, yet it never seemed to progress beyond the planning stage. "When is that happening?" I asked. My mother's eyes slid away from mine. "Soon. They're just finalizing some details." Before I could press further, Ronald shuffled into the kitchen, looking pleased with himself. "Morning, ladies," he announced, helping himself to coffee. "Roofer's coming today. Good thing we had that car money, eh, Millie?" I said nothing, which he seemed to take as agreement. "By the way," he continued, "I used your printer last night. Hope you don't mind. Had to get some invoices out." I froze mid-sip. My printer was in my bedroom, which meant he'd entered my private space without permission. Again. "What invoices?" I asked. "Got a line on a new client. Needed to look professional." He tapped his temple knowingly. Business strategy. As I left for work, I noticed fresh tire tracks in the mud beside the driveway, as if someone had driven across our lawn. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was watering her flowers and waved me over. "I was going to call your mother," she said in a hushed voice. "That man who bought your car came back last night. He and your stepfather were loading things into a truck. I thought you should know." A chill ran through me. "What things?" Mrs. Patterson shrugged. "Couldn't see clearly in the dark. Boxes, some furniture maybe. They were trying to be quiet about it." I thanked her and drove to work in my rental car, my mind racing. What else had Ronald sold? What else was missing that I hadn't yet noticed? During my lunch break, I called the bank where my mother and I held our joint account. The balance was significantly lower than it should have been. "There was a withdrawal yesterday," the representative informed me. $5,000 cash. The roof repair was supposed to cost $1,200. The car had sold for nearly $8,000, according to Ronald. When I returned home that evening, the roofer's truck was nowhere to be seen. No repairs had been started, Ronald's car was gone too, and my mother sat at the kitchen table, her eyes red from crying. "He's gone," she whispered. "Took the money and left. Said he'd be back in a few days once he sorted some things out." I sat beside her, taking her trembling hands in mine. "Mom, what's really going on?" "I think Ronald has a gambling problem," my mother confessed, her voice barely audible. "He's been disappearing with large amounts of money, coming back empty-handed. When I ask questions, he gets defensive or makes up stories about business investments. The admission explained so much: the chronic money shortages despite my contributions, Ronald's erratic behavior, the mysterious business prospects that never materialized. "How long have you known?" I asked gently. "Suspected for months, known for certain, about 3 weeks. I found IOUs in his wallet from someone named Vince. Thousands of dollars." She looked up, her eyes haunted. "I confronted him. He promised to stop, to get help. He seemed sincere. Then your car—" "He sold my car to pay a gambling debt," I concluded flatly. My mother nodded miserably. "Probably, and now he's taken the money from our account too." I spent the weekend helping my mother piece together the extent of Ronald's deception. We found pawn tickets for her jewelry, including her first wedding ring from my father. We discovered credit cards opened in her name that she knew nothing about. We uncovered a second phone with threatening text messages from creditors. On Monday morning, I went to work early to use the company's secure internet connection. I logged into the joint account I shared with my mother and enabled notifications for any transaction, no matter how small. Then I called my bank to freeze my personal accounts and credit cards. By Wednesday, Ronald still hadn't returned. My mother was frantic, alternating between worry for his safety and anger at his betrayal. I suggested she file a police report, but she resisted. "He's still my husband, Millie. What if he's in real trouble? What if someone's threatening him?" Her loyalty, even now, was both admirable and frustrating. I focused instead on practical measures, helping her close vulnerable accounts and document what was missing. Thursday night, my phone pinged with a transaction alert: a $2,000 withdrawal from our joint account, made at an ATM in a neighboring town. I showed my mother the notification with grim satisfaction. "At least now we know he's alive." She nodded, relief battling with betrayal in her expression. "What do we do now?" "We protect what's left," I decided. "First thing tomorrow, we're going to the bank." The bank manager's office was quiet and discreet as my mother signed the paperwork to remove Ronald from her accounts. She'd brought identification, marriage certificate, and bank statements. Everything needed to assert control over her finances. "I'll need to close this joint account entirely," she explained to the manager, "and open a new one with just myself and my daughter as authorized users." The manager nodded sympathetically. "That's perfectly understandable, Mrs. Weber. We can make that happen today." As we were completing the paperwork, my phone rang. Ronald's number. I stepped outside to take the call. "Where the hell is my money?" he demanded without preamble. "I tried to make a withdrawal and the account's frozen." "Where's my car?" I countered. "And my laptop? And my mother's retirement fund?" "Don't get smart with me," he snarled. "I needed that money for an important business opportunity. Your mother understood that," she agreed. "No, she didn't. She never agreed to any of this." "Put her on the phone," he demanded. "This is between me and my wife." "She's busy right now, closing your access to her accounts, actually." There was a moment of stunned silence before Ronald's voice turned cajoling. "Look, Millie, I know how this must seem, but I'm about to turn everything around. I've got a sure thing this time. Double or triple our investment. We just need to trust each other here." His practiced smoothness, the easy lies, I could finally hear them clearly, and I could see how they had worked on my mother for so long. "Come home, Ronald," I said, matching his reasonable tone. "Let's talk this through like family." "That's more like it," he replied, audibly relieved. "I'll be there tonight. We'll sort everything out." As I ended the call, I felt a grim resolve solidify within me. Ronald was coming home, thinking he could talk his way out of this, manipulate us again. He thought he'd found another opportunity to exploit our trust. Instead, he was walking into a reckoning. Ronald arrived that evening with flowers for my mother and a box of expensive chocolates for me, peace offerings purchased with our money. He entered the house with the confidence of someone who had escaped consequences all his life. "Ladies, I know I have some explaining to do, he began, his practiced charm on full display. But first, I want to apologize for the worry I caused. My mother sat stiffly on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I remained standing, watching him perform his contrition with a detachment that felt almost clinical. I made a mistake, he continued. A serious one. But I've learned my lesson. In fact, I've already taken steps to make things right. From his jacket pocket, he produced a check and handed it to me with a flourish. For your car, it's not the full amount yet, but it's a start. I know how much that vehicle meant to you. I examined the check, $5,000 from an account I didn't recognize, made out in messy handwriting. The bank name was obscured by a coffee stain. Whether deliberately or accidentally, I couldn't tell. Where did this money come from? I asked. Ronald's smile faltered slightly. A business associate. He owed me for some consulting work. Which associate? You wouldn't know him. Construction industry guy. Ronald turned to my mother, clearly trying to redirect the conversation. Catherine, I know you're upset, but I've got great news. Remember that development deal I told you about? It's happening. Contracts being drawn up as we speak. 6 figures, minimum. My mother's expression remained unchanged. You said that 3 months ago about the West Side project, and before that, the restaurant renovation. This is different, Ronald insisted. It's a sure thing. I decided to test a theory. Is Vince involved in this deal? Ronald froze momentarily before recovering. Vince? No. This is with Henderson Properties, totally legitimate. Interesting, I said, because there is no Henderson Properties in Portland. I checked. The facade cracked just slightly, a tightening around the eyes, a forced chuckle. Not Portland. They're based in Seattle, expanding to our market. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen, a banking app displaying a balance of $0 in the joint account he had shared with my mother. Looking for this? I asked quietly. His expression darkened. What did you do? Protected my mother's assets. The account is closed. You had no right? Ronald's charm evaporated, replaced by indignation. That's my money too. Actually, it wasn't, I replied calmly. Mom opened that account with her inheritance long before she met you. You were added as a joint holder, but the funds were hers, and what little you contributed was more than offset by what you withdrew for gambling. Ronald turned to my mother, switching tactics again. Catherine, are you going to let her talk to me like this? I'm your husband. My mother took a deep breath. I found the pawn tickets, Ronald. For my mother's jewelry. For James's wedding ring. James, my father. The mention of his name seemed to catch Ronald off guard. I can explain that, he began. And I found these, she continued, placing a stack of papers on the coffee table. Credit card statements for accounts in my name that I never opened. That's identity theft, Ronald. His face flushed with anger. You're overreacting. Married couples share finances. I was handling things. By selling my daughter's car? By gambling away our savings? My mother's voice rose slightly. By lying to me for years? Ronald stood abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. I made some mistakes, sure, but I'm still the man of this house. As he moved toward the door, I stepped into his path. Before you go, there's something else you should know. I handed him a folder containing documents my mother and I had carefully prepared. Bank statements showing the pattern of withdrawals coinciding with his gambling activities, credit reports revealing the fraudulent accounts, and finally, a formal statement my mother had filed with the police that morning. Not a missing person report, but a complaint of financial exploitation and fraud. What is this? He demanded, flipping through the pages. Evidence, I replied simply. Of everything. Ronald's face contorted with rage. You scheming little... He stopped himself, visibly forcing a calmer demeanor. This proves nothing. It'll be your word against mine. Actually, came a new voice from the dining room doorway. It won't be. My cousin Brent, a police detective, stepped into view, along with a uniformed officer I didn't recognize. Ronald's expression shifted from shock to calculation to a desperate, ugly anger as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. In that moment, I saw him clearly for what he truly was. Not a charming entrepreneur with bad luck, but a predator who had targeted my vulnerable mother and never expected to be held accountable. "Ronald Weber," Brent said formally, "we'd like you to come downtown to answer some questions." After Ronald was escorted from the house, my mother collapsed onto the couch, her composure finally breaking. "Did I do the right thing?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's still my husband." I sat beside her, holding her hand. "You did the brave thing, the necessary thing." Brent returned an hour later with news. Ronald was being held for questioning related to financial fraud and identity theft. A search of his car had revealed my stolen laptop, along with financial documents belonging to at least 2 other women, previous victims, presumably. "It's not your fault," Brent told my mother gently. "Men like Ronald are practiced manipulators. They target kind people, especially widows with assets." The next morning brought a new shock. Brent called to inform us that Ronald had been released on bail, paid by someone named Vincent Barone, the same Vince from the IOUs we'd found. "A known associate of some problematic characters," Brent explained cryptically. "We're keeping an eye on the situation, but I'd suggest you both stay somewhere else for a few days, just as a precaution." We packed overnight bags and checked into a hotel across town. That evening, my phone rang with a call from our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. "There's a truck at your house," she reported nervously. "Men are loading furniture into it." I thanked her and immediately called Brent, who promised to send officers to investigate. 20 minutes later, he called back. "Ronald and 2 associates were removing items from the house," he confirmed. "They claimed Ronald was just collecting his personal belongings, which he has a legal right to do until divorce proceedings formalize the separation of assets." "What did they take?" my mother asked when I relayed this information. "Brent didn't specify," I admitted. "We'll have to inventory when we return." When we were allowed back home 2 days later, the extent of Ronald's vindictiveness became clear. He had taken not just his clothes and personal items, but also electronics, kitchen appliances, and even family photos, things he knew had sentimental value to my mother. Most concerning, her filing cabinet had been emptied, potentially including sensitive financial and identity documents. "This feels like punishment," my mother said, surveying the half-empty house. "For standing up to him." "It is," I agreed. "But it also means he's scared. He's lashing out because he knows we have evidence against him." That evidence, however, was now at risk. Many of our carefully gathered documents had been in the filing cabinet. Without them, the case against Ronald would be significantly weakened. I called Brent in a panic. "He took our evidence." "Not all of it," Brent reassured me. "The formal statements and copies of the key documents are safe with us, but anything you had at home?" I hung up and sat heavily on the stripped couch, trying to think. What else did we have? What else could we use? Then it hit me. "Mom, remember that safety deposit box Dad insisted you keep? The one with your important documents?" Her eyes widened. "At First National. I haven't accessed it in years." The next morning, we were at the bank when it opened. The safety deposit box contained exactly what we needed: original copies of my mother's financial documents from before her marriage, including statements from the 1950s, accounts Ronald had drained, the property deed showing the house belonged solely to my mother, and most crucially, a thumb drive my father had apparently left behind. The drive contained a detailed accounting system, my father's meticulous financial records, which my mother had continued updating out of habit for years after his death. It showed every deposit, every withdrawal, and every transaction in accounts Ronald had accessed. It was a complete financial history that would definitively prove which assets belonged to my mother before marriage, and trace exactly how Ronald had systematically exploited them. Dad was always organized, I said softly, scrolling through the files. He always said good records were the best protection. My mother squeezed my hand. He would be so proud of you, Millie. With the retrieved evidence securely copied and provided to Brent, we returned home to find Ronald waiting in our driveway. Ronald leaned against his car, a calculated casualness in his posture. When he saw us, he straightened, adjusting his jacket with the nervous gesture I'd come to recognize as his tell. "Catherine, we need to talk," he called as we approached, alone. My mother's steps faltered, but she didn't stop walking. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Millie." His expression hardened. "This is between husband and wife." "Not anymore," she replied, her voice steady. "My lawyer filed separation papers this morning." This clearly wasn't the reception he'd expected. Ronald's charm offensive switched on immediately. "Look, I know things got out of hand, but we can work this out. That detective has it all wrong. I was just trying to protect our assets, manage things properly." "By stealing my identity?" my mother asked. "By pawning my wedding ring from James?" Ronald's eyes flicked to me, his expression darkening. "This is her doing, isn't it? Turning you against me. She's always been jealous of our relationship." I said nothing, letting my mother handle this last confrontation in her own way. "No, Ronald, this is your doing." She withdrew a folded paper from her purse and held it out. "This is a restraining order. You're not welcome here anymore." He ignored the document, his face flushing with anger. "You can't do this. Half of everything is mine by law." "Actually," I interjected, "that's not how it works when fraud is involved. Everything you took from accounts that existed before your marriage? That's theft. The credit cards you opened in Mom's name? That's identity theft. The documented pattern of financial exploitation of a widow? That's elder abuse." Ronald's composure cracked completely. "You think you're so smart, don't you? With your fancy financial job and your little spreadsheets? You've got no idea who you're dealing with." "We know exactly who we're dealing with," I replied calmly. "And so do the police, the district attorney, and the 3 other women who've come forward since your arrest." That stopped him cold. "What women? What are you talking about?" My mother stepped forward, a strength in her posture I hadn't seen in years. "Take the restraining order, Ronald. And if you ever come near my daughter or me again, I'll personally make sure you spend the next decade in prison." In the weeks that followed, Ronald's carefully constructed world collapsed completely. The district attorney charged him with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation. His gambling debts caught up with him when Vince Barone, revealed to be a loan shark with connections to organized crime, decided Ronald was more liability than asset. My mother filed for divorce, with a detailed accounting of Ronald's financial abuses, ensuring she retained the house and all assets that were rightfully hers. 3 other women, all widows around my mother's age, came forward with similar stories of exploitation, creating a pattern of predatory behavior that the prosecutor was eager to highlight. Most satisfyingly, my car was located and returned through an investigation of the fraudulent sale. My laptop was recovered too, its contents providing even more evidence of Ronald's schemes. 6 months later, Ronald accepted a plea deal. 5 years in prison, restitution to all victims, and a permanent record that would prevent him from ever targeting vulnerable women again. The night after his sentencing, my mother and I sat on her porch swing, watching the sunset with glasses of wine in hand. "I keep thinking about all the red flags I ignored," she said softly. "How did I not see it?" "He was good at what he did," I replied. "And you wanted to see the best in him. There's no shame in that." She smiled, the lingering sadness in her eyes beginning to fade. "Your father would be so proud of you, Millie." "I know I am." I thought about the invisible line Ronald had crossed. The moment he'd decided my car, my possessions, my very autonomy were his to control. He'd never imagined I would draw a different line, one he couldn't manipulate or erase. "I'm proud of us both," I said, clinking my glass against hers. Here's to new beginnings. The house still needed a new roof. But now, for the first time in years, it truly felt like home again.